There was a time when Ulysses S. Grant looked like a failure. He had left the army. He struggled in business. He worked in his father's leather goods store in Galena, Illinois. He wore worn-out clothes. He had little money, little prestige, and almost no public reputation. If you had met him in those years, you would not have guessed that this quiet, unimpressive man would one day command the largest army in American history, crush the Confederacy, accept Robert E. Lee's surrender, and help save the United States itself. That is what makes Grant such a fascinating figure. He did not look heroic. He did not sound heroic. He did not carry himself like a great man from legend. He was not a dazzling speaker. He was not glamorous. He was not theatrical. He rarely tried to impress anyone. And yet, when the greatest crisis in American history came, Grant turned out to be exactly the man the Union needed. His life is one of the great reversals in American history. A struggling, unremarkable former officer becoming the general who won the Civil War, and later the president who fought to protect the results of that victory. This is the story of Ulysses S. Grant, the man who kept going, kept fighting, and changed the fate of a nation. Ulysses S. Grant was born Hiram Ulysses Grant in Ohio in 1822. Thanks to a clerical mistake when he entered West Point, he became known as Ulysses S. Grant, and the name stayed. Even as a young man, Grant did not fit the image of a future conqueror. He was quiet, reserved, and often uncomfortable in social situations. But he had qualities that would matter later: discipline, toughness, calmness under pressure, and an unusual ability to stay focused when others lost their nerve. At West Point, Grant was not the top student in his class, but he proved capable and dependable. He especially excelled as a horseman. After graduation, he served in the Mexican-American War, where he saw combat and learned valuable lessons about military leadership, logistics, and the cost of war. That war mattered. It exposed Grant to real battlefield conditions and put him in contact with officers who would later shape the Civil War on both sides. But perhaps most importantly, it taught him what good commanders looked like and what bad ones did wrong. Still, nothing about his early career suggested national greatness. When the Mexican War ended, Grant returned to routine army life, and that life did not suit him well. After his army service, Grant's life became difficult. He was stationed far from his family and struggled deeply with loneliness. Rumors and accusations about drinking followed him, some exaggerated, some probably grounded in real struggles. In 1854, he resigned from the army. He was only in his early 30s, and the decision looked less like a transition and more like a collapse. The years that followed were hard. Grant tried farming and failed. He tried business and failed. He lived with financial strain and uncertainty. At one point, he was reduced to working in his father's store. By the eve of the Civil War, he was not a celebrated veteran or a rising public figure. He was, in the eyes of many, a man whose best chances had already passed him by. But these years, humiliating as they were, shaped Grant's character. He learned endurance. He learned humility. He learned what it meant to keep going when life did not reward you. He became a man less concerned with image and more concerned with results. That would become one of his greatest strengths. When the Civil War began in 1861, the Union had many famous men, many political generals, many officers with more polished reputations. What it did not yet know was that one of the most effective soldiers in the entire war was working quietly in a small-town store. When Southern states seceded and the Civil War erupted, Grant returned to military service. At first, he struggled to secure a significant command. People overlooked him. Some remembered his resignation. Others simply did not know who he was. But once Grant got into the field, he began to show what made him different. Early in the war, many Union commanders were overly cautious. They hesitated. They feared mistakes. They worried about losing battles more than winning the war. Grant was different. He understood that victory would require action. He was willing to move, willing to attack, and willing to fight continuously. His first major successes came in 1862 with Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee. At Fort Donelson, when Confederate commanders asked for terms, Grant replied that he would accept only unconditional and immediate surrender. That phrase electrified the North. Suddenly, the quiet officer nobody had cared much about became a national figure. Unconditional surrender Grant was aggressive, determined, and not interested in half measures. The Union, desperate for good news, finally had a general who seemed capable of winning. Then came Shiloh. In April 1862, Grant's forces were surprised by a fierce Confederate attack in Tennessee. The battle became one of the bloodiest in American history up to that point. For 2 days, the fighting was savage and chaotic. Thousands were killed or wounded. The scale of the slaughter shocked the nation. Critics attacked Grant. They said he had been careless. They said he had nearly lost the army. They called for his removal. But Grant did not break. He held on through the crisis, received reinforcements, counterattacked, and won the battle. More importantly, Shiloh revealed something that many Americans had not yet understood. This war would not be short, clean, or romantic. It would be long, brutal, and terribly expensive. Grant understood that reality faster than many others. He did not love bloodshed for its own sake, but he grasped something essential. The Confederacy would not be defeated by timid gestures or symbolic victories. It would have to be beaten militarily, persistently, and decisively. That required a commander willing to absorb pressure and keep fighting. Grant was becoming that commander. If Fort Donelson made Grant famous, Vicksburg made him indispensable. The Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg, Mississippi, sat on high ground overlooking the Mississippi River. As long as the Confederacy held it, it controlled a critical artery of trade, transportation, and strategy. Taking Vicksburg would split the Confederacy in two. Grant launched one of the boldest campaigns of the war. He moved his army through difficult terrain, cut loose from some traditional supply lines, crossed the Mississippi, won a string of battles, and trapped the Confederate army inside Vicksburg. Then he settled into siege warfare and slowly squeezed the city into surrender. On July 4, 1863, Vicksburg fell. It was one of the most important victories of the entire Civil War. The Union now controlled the Mississippi River, and the Confederacy was badly weakened. Combined with the Union victory at Gettysburg the day before, it marked a turning point in the war. Vicksburg showed Grant at his best. Patient when needed, aggressive when needed, strategically imaginative, and relentlessly committed to the objective. Abraham Lincoln understood the scale of the achievement. Grant was no longer just another general. He was emerging as the Union's most effective military leader. In 1864, Lincoln promoted Grant to command all Union armies. This was the role the war had been waiting for. Grant brought a new approach. Instead of treating each Union army as a separate effort, he coordinated broad, simultaneous campaigns against the Confederacy. He understood that the South had fewer resources and fewer men. If the Union kept pressure on all fronts, the Confederacy would have less and less room to recover. Most famously, Grant fought Lee in the Overland Campaign, brutal battles in places like the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor. These battles produced terrible casualties, and Grant's reputation suffered among those who saw only the losses. But Grant was doing something previous Union commanders had often failed to do. He kept advancing. When earlier generals fought Lee and took losses, they frequently pulled back. Grant did not. He moved south again and again, forcing Lee into a war of exhaustion the Confederacy could not sustain. This is one of the central truths about Grant. He understood that winning the war mattered more than preserving appearances. He did not seek glorious theater. He sought strategic victory. At the same time, William Tecumseh Sherman pushed through Georgia, further crushing the Confederacy's ability to continue the fight. Together, Grant and Sherman applied the kind of sustained pressure that finally brought Confederate resistance toward collapse. In April 1865, after months of mounting pressure, Robert E. Lee's army was trapped near Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. There, Lee surrendered to Grant. The scene became one of the most iconic in American history. Lee appeared in full dress uniform, dignified and immaculate. Grant arrived mud-spattered and plain, wearing the uniform of a working soldier. The contrast was striking. But what mattered most was how Grant handled victory. He offered generous terms. Confederate officers could keep their sidearms. Soldiers could return home. Those with horses could take them for spring planting. Grant understood that the Union had to win the peace as well as the war. Humiliation might feed bitterness. Restraint might help reunify the country. That moment captured Grant's character. Firm in war, restrained in victory, focused on results rather than spectacle. Grant's story did not end at Appomattox. He would go on to serve as president during Reconstruction, where he fought, imperfectly but sincerely, to protect the rights of formerly enslaved people and to suppress white supremacist violence. Historians have debated his presidency, but many now view it more favorably, especially for his commitment to civil rights and national unity. But even if we focus only on the Civil War, Grant's place in history is secure. He was not the Union's most elegant figure. He was not its greatest orator. He was not its most dramatic personality. He was something rarer. He was the man who delivered victory. He took a broken reputation and turned it into one of the most remarkable second acts in American history. He rose from obscurity to command, from hardship to triumph, from failure to greatness. And when the United States faced its greatest test, Ulysses S. Grant proved that sometimes the person who saves a nation is not the one who looks the part, but the one who refuses to quit.